I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today is Friday. Today we present the Healing Circle in association with the African American Child Wellness Institute. And we're glad to have Brother Yeli Akinsanya. I see he's right here. And also I'm looking at Dr. Oliver Williams. Dr. Williams, good to see you again. Pleasure having you on board. We had a great conversation when you were on board a couple of weeks ago. Good to see you back. My friend and one of our leaders at the Institute Initiative on behalf of children, Kanani Hurd, is here, and my colleague, Brenda Lyle-Gray, is here. Good afternoon, everybody. You know, you might be checking us out on the Insight Facebook page or on the McFarlane Media dashboard. You may be connecting with us through the Facebook page of the Black Press of America, National Newspaper Publishers Association, or you may be watching us on our YouTube channel. Any way you connect, we appreciate and value the connection, the opportunity to talk to you and for you to talk to us, for us to talk to each other. That's what this is all about. How do we create meaningful engagement, meaningful connection? I'm asking you to spread the message, spread the word, build the connection. We're building conversations. So if you are checking us out, even if you're watching this later, like it and share it to your friends. We're building communication, building connections. I think we're building towards our best selves in community and in the world. I want to begin today by thinking about and acknowledging, remembering 9/11 tomorrow. Maybe all of my colleagues today will think about where they were when the news of 9/11 was unfolding in New York and then in Washington and in Pennsylvania, and reflections on that, what it meant to you personally, what you think it meant to our country and to the world, and how does it influence how we see ourselves and see the future at the present time. And Brenda and I were on the phone on another program a couple of days ago, and she talked about how personally she was impacted by that. So I want to go straight to Brenda Lyle-Gray, first of all, and ask Brenda to begin the conversation by telling your personal story, your observation, how 9/11 has impacted you.
Thank you, Al.
Passing the talking stick to you, Brenda.
Thank you. And good afternoon to everyone. Yeli, it's good seeing you. I miss the other Akinsanya. My daughter was in 9/11 and she was 2 blocks away. And it was interesting because I was teaching school and I got the phone call and the first plane had hit and she had just come off of the subway. My oldest daughter's an actress. She had just gotten an agent, but she also had applied for a job in the second building on the 36th floor. And she had gone in for the third interview and she had a turtleneck sweater on. And the woman said that it was unprofessional. Well, we know what that was because this was a different woman than had given her the interview for the first and second one. So if you're a believer, staunch like I am, you know this was God's will. Anyway, the call came in and I lived in a cul-de-sac and we were walking around to the TVs and stuff and watching. And finally she said, "Mom, I have $20. I'm going to get a pair of tennis shoes and I'm going to walk the bridge like thousands of others." Well, imagine being a mother, your daughter is 3,000 miles away and you just don't know what's happening. And not only that, but I was concerned about the 3,000 people that didn't know, like the Miami condo, that it was going to be their last day. Mm-hmm. So what was interesting was that we did get her back to Brooklyn where she lived. And I said, well, I might as well go on back to my class. And I taught in an alternative high school. What was so disappointing was that my students didn't know where Afghanistan was on a map. And I said, now here our country has just experienced something that they've never experienced before. And our students are just that naive, that not necessarily naive, they just hadn't been taught. I was teaching English, writing, of course. And anyway, every time it comes up, I talked to Al yesterday and I said, every time 9/11 comes up, I'm just like, I'm glad I'm not an alcoholic. That's all I can say, because it hurts. And I was scared, and I still have nightmares. And I need a Dr. B to come in and examine, because 20 years are gone. So anyway, that's my story. It was pretty tough. And at the same time, my daughter was going through, my youngest daughter, who went to University of Redlands. You might not be able to see this. I sent this to Al yesterday. It says, white supremacy pervasive at University of Redlands. So CORE had come up to Redlands. It's like 50 miles east of LA. And they were stalking my daughter. So my youngest one is being stalked by skinheads, and my oldest one is in the middle of a world catastrophe. And I'm balancing it because I'm an only child and I don't have an extended family. Most of my extended family are gone. And so if anyone pulled on the grace of God, I pulled on him and I said, Father, and I can remember it to this day. I said, Father, I can't do this by myself. You got to step in for me. And I'll start crying again because, and that's what's so interesting about trauma. And Dr. B, I don't want to take this up, but it doesn't leave. It just doesn't go away. I'm writing an article now called The Restroom, and it's about trauma. And it's about standing outside of this restroom on a roadside park because we couldn't stay in hotels or eat in restaurants or whatever. And at that time, Blacks could not go into the restrooms until the white mothers and their children came out. So by that time, I had released, and at 74, I can remember the pee running down into my favorite tennis shoes, and my mother was crying. And, at 6 years old, what did I know? I just know I couldn't go into the restroom. So this trauma just lingers. And when I was writing this article, it was more to it. It was more on youth trauma. But when I was writing this article, I was thinking of Judge Peter Cahill. And I was sitting at my old computer and I'm saying, Al, I don't know if I could finish this, because that's, how dare you say that trauma doesn't linger? That's 7 decades. And that's 20 years of my child 3,000 miles away. And I'm still having nightmares. So how dare you say that Donald Williams, that Darnella and Frazier and the young girl, that they witnessed something so horrific and they weren't traumatized. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's my story.
That's a good story. Thank you for sharing that, Brenda. Thank you so much. Let me just pass the talking stick to Tananya Hurd. Tananya, I was also sending you a note in the chat. Your light is from behind you, so you're kind of a shadow. And I don't know if you can position yourself to have the light on your face so we can see you better. But let me pass the talking stick to you. And you have to unmute as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I do remember 9/11 like it was yesterday, getting ready for work and watching the news like we usually do, and just thinking, did I change this to a movie? Is this a movie I'm watching right now? just looking at the horrific things that were happening, and all of the people who we've lost, the people who've been injured, and thinking now 20 years later, not only about the people that we lost, but our survivors as well. And it's like Sister Brenda said, it's trauma. It's traumatizing for the survivors. The survivors bear scars and the weight of just unanswerable questions still from that day. There are people that are still grappling with the place of that enormous loss of life. And and we're told to get over it, move on. Let's have remembrances. Let's ring bell the tolls and all this, but none of that really, to me, it doesn't tackle the trauma that so many people are still experiencing here 20 years later.
Thank you. Well, so our title today is Remembering the Dead and the Dying, and our commitment to do better. And so we're on that track in this conversation. And I want to bring in next my brother, my Yoruba brother, Yele Akinsanya. Yele is teaching me Yoruba. And so Yele, please, sir, greet me in Yoruba so that we can continue this practice of always exchanging greetings in Yoruba every time we connect.
Ekason, meaning good afternoon.
Okay, and my answer is what?
You tell me Kason, my dear, or Kason, my aburo.
Casa ma aburo.
There you
Close,
go.
okay.
Kason, my kid brother.
All righty. Thank you. So I'm passing the talking stick to you.
Okay.
And interested in particular, you're going to bring a unique perspective as a newly arrived American, right? A unique perspective that's different probably from mine and Brenda's. What do you think?
Well, I can tell you this happened 20 years ago, but I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, and to whom I was speaking. That's how profound it is. And some of the discussion that I had with the person that I was talking to at Cowell Banker Burnett real estate company in Plymouth that day, I cannot repeat it off, online. I mean, on the air. But basically, if you remember, I was in land development around that time, and I had a development portfolio that I was delivering to Cowell Banker. I had some real estate agents that are working with us. I was delivering it. Then this young lady, well, she was about my age then. Well, this young lady comes into the room. We were in our office within the office. She's Caucasian. And she said something to me that was truly profound. And maybe that's why I remember. And I'm like, what just happened? He said, the World Trade Center just got blown up with by terrorists on a plane. And then the Pentagon, and then she said to me, Yele, she closed the door before she made her comment. And she said to me, could it be that what we do around the world and the way we do it is not sitting well with a lot of people? And that's why they did this. First, I thought I didn't even know how to respond to that. And I was kind of like, let me think about that. Because like President Biden said, when he withdrew every single American soul, at least try to withdraw every American single soul from Afghanistan within the past month, we cannot continue to fight and have wars all over the place. Not every diplomatic problem is winnable with guns and ammunition and bombs. When you see majority of people who go to war in America or who are sent to war in America are not children of the 1%ers. They are not children of the Congress people. whether they're House of Representatives or the Senate. None of their children go. We have very few members of House of Rep now that have been to the war or that have been in the one of the units of the armed forces. But I'm tired of people who do not have the resources and who basically depend on the armed forces to lift themselves up, being sent to wage wars that we do not have anything to gain from. We don't have anything to gain from waging wars all over the world. All we do is basically expose Americans to more dangers. And that was the discussion that I was having with this lady. It was, I felt so bad for the people who are caught up in all this mess. But then the military industrial complex have basically sold us this garbage about us waging wars all over the place so that we can solve diplomatic problems. We cannot, and we cannot continue to do that. And I'll say this much, and I'll keep my mouth shut so that we can pass the torch to somebody else. If you think about it, and I don't think we are finished with waging wars all over the world, the military industrial complex, they build all this ammunition so that they can make money. Mm-hmm. The only way they can continue to make money is to use the ammunition. They cannot use ammunition unless there are wars. So, as big as the military industrial complex is in the United States, this large budget cycle that this happened last week. Some Democrats were against increasing the military budget. The military didn't ask for an increase, but warmongers within each party, not just the Democrats or Republicans now, the people who are in the pocket of the military industrial complex, put this pressure on them, and they still increase the military budget by more than 15% for something that they don't need. Why are we spending all this money when we could use all this money that we're devoted to the military industrial complex? We can use it to build schools, build solar fields all over the United States, have a world-class education in this country, because our education system is crappy. I'll pass the torch.
Thank you, Brother Yelly. Let me pass it over to Dr. Oliver Williams, and let me introduce him properly. Thank you again, Dr. Williams, for being here. Dr. Williams is the executive director of the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, and he's a professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. And your work around family violence and domestic violence, I think, brings a unique perspective to understanding the impact of the dynamic of both just as I would say, on the one hand, most Americans, at least our people, see ourselves as kind of innocent bystanders, sort of witnessing and sometimes directly impacted by international angst. The 9/11 was, in effect, you could call it terror or call it payback or retribution, however it happened. Most of us will say we personally didn't cause it. We weren't the source of it, but we certainly experienced it, if not tangentially, some directly, like Brenda's daughter may have. But how do we, Dr. Williams, assemble some kind of sensibility, some kind of sense, make sense of what happened and how it affects us both individually and culturally?
Well, I guess the thing I think about was, I remember during that time, different people were trying to explore the reasons why it happened. And some voices got heard and some voices were muted. And I think some of the voices were muted because they're sort of counter to what our belief systems were. You know, that I think people from different countries are saying, we don't want you in our country. We don't want you to put your foot on the ground here. And as a consequence, this violence happened. I know that there was a discussion about whether Saudi Arabia was more involved in it than we were aware of. because a lot of the people that were the people on the planes were from Saudi Arabia, and that was and that we went to Iraq and we went to Afghanistan, but the truth about it was that we weren't very clear about why went to different places, and part of it was because of the oil, and so we really never had a broad discussion about it. Although, despite whatever rationale they came up with, it wasn't right to do what they did. To be able to kill innocent people for their perspectives associated with things. But I think getting some sense about things and then also getting the truth about it may influence, why we were in a 20-year war, and not necessarily building things that we said that we wanted to try to build and undo some of the things that that occurred. And I think one of the things that Biden is doing is kind of suggesting that for as much money that we put into it, and we put a lot of money into it, it didn't change the dynamics of what happens in Afghanistan. And which is lessons that we should have learned ourselves from when Russia went in, and also things that we needed to think about when we went in, and we weren't nation building. We weren't reconstructing much of anything. And so, but I think having some a sensibility around it is one thing, and then dealing with the ideologies of what we thought the right thing was to do was that if somebody attacks us, we're going to figure out who to attack, but I don't think we ended up identifying who the proper groups were to attack. But we know that we felt the loss in the United States, and we felt uncomfortable with that. So I think we're still trying to figure out how to make sense of it, and how to make sense of the losses and the discomfort. I remember in 9/11, I was in San Diego at a conference, and I had a project a conference I go to in San Diego every year around late August or early September. And I also had some work that I was doing in consultation with an organization in New York, not far from the World Trade Center. So the day of the 9/11, the first plane that hit, and we were trying to make a decision about whether we're going to go forward with the conference or not. What they decided to do was to leave the TVs on so we could see what was going on, and restructure what was happening with the different sessions, because people were curious about what was going on because they didn't get it. Mm-hmm. And I think people had assumed that it might have been a terrorist attack. And then, so we were all in this auditorium watching TVs as they were discussing it. And it was up on the screens for the conference. Then the second plane hit. And then we had a discussion about that. And they tried to take care of people. They divided it up and did sort of a triage to figure out how they were going to respond to people's immediate needs who were there for medical, but also opportunities for people to sort of talk about sets of issues. And the conference dealt with trauma. And so they spent a really good amount of time trying to address the people who were in the audience, and had breakout spaces for them to have conversations about things. But how we moved on and how we had conversations about how we felt, and it was interesting to me, other spaces where you may have had reactions to what you were saying. And of course, I grew up in the city of Detroit, in 50s and 60s and 70s, early 70s. And so it took me back to the riots and a lot of people on the dais started to reflect on different traumatic experiences in their life. And so growing up in Detroit during a riot, you saw things happen where people were upending things that you saw happening. Not everything was good, but the traumatic experiences some of us of a certain age dealt with was when we saw law enforcement come in and enforce. We saw police units. We saw military gear going through the city streets of Detroit, and we saw aggression. And it was one of those times when you saw things get burnt up and bombed out, and people had a reaction to those things. I certainly did from what I witnessed growing up, and so I guess one of the things that I felt was I was wondering how the people in Iraq, but also Afghanistan, were experiencing when we were bombing, their countries.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing I was wondering about is how we as a country felt when we saw people were being affected wrongly, by something, because they were the innocents. They weren't the people that deployed those different behaviors. And then the other thing that I noticed is that in the midst of dealing with those challenges, sometimes you saw the people within the country be the best of themselves and open up their heart to deal with other people who were dealing with the impact of that behavior. So you have all that hurting. And then it reminded me of the quote of Martin Luther King. He says that when you try to deal with things an eye to an eye, it leaves both people blind. And we weren't trying to figure out, we're reacting, but not trying to figure out what we could do collectively to be able to respond to the problem. And that we couldn't in our positions, in our communities, but to rethink it, maybe there are things that we could do to try to reduce the trauma that we experienced from without, like thinking about George Floyd and law enforcement, but also the abuse that we do within our families, within our community. And we've got to be able to have both those conversations.
That's right.
To be able to help to reduce the problem. And that's something that we've got to be willing to do. With our church experience, there's people who've been writing about things about how faith communities and different faith houses can contribute to reducing the problem of family violence and community violence. But we have to go within our community, but also outside our community. Maybe. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Let me pass the stick to our co-host and leader in the African American Child Wellness Institute, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya. Dr. B, the talking stick is passed to you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. I am again very glad and grateful to be here, recognizing that we are sitting, learning, growing, and living on land that was nursed by the Lakota Nation and its peoples, recognizing our ancestors, and one who is gone today, who's being acknowledged, is Dr. Mary Tatum Howard in St. Cloud. At this very moment, they're putting her body to rest, but her spirit cannot rest, at least as long as there's injustice. And I recognize my sister. I remember her and her spirit and her activism as a Black woman psychologist working at the Veterans Administration being not just the few or only woman in that area, but the only Black woman, making that powerful movement through that space that changed most of the people she touched, changed our lives forever. So I want to acknowledge her as we talk about this context of between war, hope, living, and growing. And I think about the fact that we lost more than 3,000 people on 9/11. And to COVID, we've lost 6,000.
600.
More 6,000, 65,000.
No, 650.
I mean, that's right, 650,000 people to COVID. Thank you, Yelly. I'm just so wrapped up. It's definitely not 6,500. 650,000 people to COVID. And so we still have to figure out what is our commitment to do better. How do we get to that space when we sit there, realize we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who have gotten us this far? But we are also to be ancestors someday, and we are elders right now to many people. How do we change our own commitment? How do we use our time on this earth and our bodies and our spirits to make sure that things that happened in the past, that they have a different outcome for the future? We know that hurt people, but we also know that greedy people, they hurt people. And some of our war, I'll say most of it, I believe they knew the culprits behind that war. They knew who the enemy really was. But as long as we're in war, some people are making money,
Yes.
selling arms. Some people are finding contracts to develop armies that won't fight for themselves like we did there. And the minute I heard that we were leaving, and I heard the soldiers were like folding like cheap suits, that they had no idea of how to lead themselves, or maybe no will to do so. I thought about Carter G. Woodson and his book, The Miseducation of the Negro. On page 17, I have memorized it, where he said that what happens in white America is when they get the money, they handle others. They don't know how to relinquish the power and control to others. And put succinctly, he says, when white folks and Black folks cooperate, it's the Black folks doing the coing and the white folks doing the operating. And they took that principle over to Afghanistan, and they're operating the soldiers, they're operating the communities. They're not doing cooperation. They're not saying, here's money, you do it. I'll be here in case you need help. They're not doing that. They're not saying, let me help you build your army. I want to see you the general. You make the decisions. They weren't doing that, because in America, we've got this thing called he or she who has the gold makes the rule. That's the golden rule. And so too often, we don't know how to empower others as a country. And many of us as people of African descent, we don't know how to hold power when we get it, because we don't have somebody who showed us how to hold power. Maybe they showed us, we didn't know, and we didn't see the lesson, because there's this conflictual, always bumping up against itself, these conflicting values of what it means to be capitalistic versus communal in our perspective of what's wellness in the world, right? You look out for yourself. You do your business. You make sure your business survives. You're not worried about the people who may be struggling in their own business. We don't say enough. Let's us work together. And when we do it, we don't know how to deeply go into something we already know. We already know that I am because we are. And if we could tap into that financially, emotionally, spiritually, socially, academically, if we could vocationally, if we could tap into that, we would always recognize that we are fierce and we're stronger together than we are apart. So I want to just beg us to think about our commitment to do better and what that model should look like as we move forward and look back, like the Sankofa bird that can only go forward by looking back. That's what we have to think about, I think, today as we remember 9/11 and the tragedy and the helplessness. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was consulting with Harvest Prep. And Mr. Mahmoud, my brother, called me and said, Dr. B, you know, what's going on? We got the teachers with the TVs on and watching it. And honestly, I had someone who was working with me in my house redoing the basement. He said, did you see what happened? And I said, no. And he said, some people ran into a building. I said, oh, Lord. But he didn't know, nor did I know that it was on purpose. And I'm thinking, okay, well, Lord help him. Somebody ran into the building. So as I went through the day and I traveled from Harvest to another consulting site, the whole downtown Minneapolis was just empty. But the only folks I saw, I'm not lying, on the street were Black folks. And then I started asking, why are we the ones out here when all this is going on? And the brother told me, said, sister, you know, it's just another day of somebody dying. So with that, I'm passing talking stick to my bye-bye brother Al McFarlane. You're mute, brother. I know you got something to say.
I do, and thank you, Dr. B. I remember being right down the street from where I'm sitting right now. I'm at home on Thomas and Plymouth in North Minneapolis. And on 9/11, we were doing this show. It was the Insight KMOJ Public Policy Forum, I think, at that time, or we recently rebranded it as Conversations with Al McFarlane. I remember the news in the morning when the first tower was struck. And between that time and the strike at the second tower, I had gone from home down to Lucille's Kitchen on Plymouth Avenue. Lucille's Kitchen is where UROC is now. And we convened our regular weekly live program. That was a unique and special program because when I opened it up, I think we were broadcasting live to KMOJ. We acknowledged that something was afoot that we don't have much information on, and that we're going to be monitoring the television right here in the restaurant so that people can sort of keep this in mind. But we said, obviously, it's a tragedy unfolding, and we'll, as we get it, pass more information along to those who might be listening on radio. And the program was unique because back in those days, we started the program off with a live band. We had my brother Wayne McFarlane and the Ipso Facto Band opening the show every day, doing creative and improvised songs. And they always did songs that spoke to the moment. And the genius of Wayne McFarlane was a particular ability to listen to people who were presenting, discussing at the forum. And on the breaks, he would create a song that either amplified what they said or challenged what they said out of the natural wit that our people bring to any situation as creatives. That day was special because I was interviewing Brother Roger Gunvir. Now, do y'all remember who he is? Brother Roger Gunvir is the actor who was in town promoting and doing his one-act play, I think, as Huey Newton. And people may remember him as the guy that was one of the stars of the Spike Lee movie, Get on the Bus. He played a policeman in that, just a powerful role. But he was here and on the program, and then as we were doing the interview and unfolding the program, the second tower was hit. So we were live broadcasting, doing the show, but also watching the monitor in the corner. And the audience facing me was looking at the screen, and I was looking at the audience and at the screen and doing the program. And we closed the program that day with Roger wanting to get up and jam with Wayne and the band. And I remember they closed the program that day with Bob Marley's song, Get Up, Stand Up for Your Rights. And there was something sort of prophetic in the feeling of that song. They were, as we were watching what was unfolding, advising, telling, encouraging Black people, African people, people in that audience and people on the radio, pay attention, but get up, stand up, speak up, stand up for your rights. and now is the time. I think that now is still the time for us to get up and stand up and speak up, because the feeling that was unleashed that day is not dissimilar to the feeling that's abroad in the community, the tension in the community that has come out of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the unrest, the reckoning from George Floyd. We're going through something right now, and it's global. But in this case, in Minneapolis, in as the epicenter of the reckoning, something is happening in our community right now. So let me just ask both Dr. B and Dr. Williams again to respond to this whole notion of how do we use these tragedies, both individually and collectively, to advance our sense of accountability, responsibility, our sense of sovereignty, and our sense of capability. How do we use this to determine and reflect that we have both a duty and an obligation to be co-authors of our personal and our collective futures? And over the past several days, Dr. B, Dr. Williams, I've been doing shows and telling people, what's on my mind is how do we order our lives and our words and our actions in ways that not only do what is intended at the moment, the moment is always alive, it's what we live with and work with, but the intention has to be the impact of this moment 7 generations out, 14 generations out. Is it possible to think that way? And if we can think that way, what does it mean? So let me pass the talking stick back to Dr. Williams, first of all. I'm just reflecting, Dr. Williams, but I'd love to have you respond and build on it or tear it down, but it's what I'm seeing and feeling in my spirit right now.
I think we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Sometimes we want to have one conversation when there needs to be multiple conversations. So when we've heard about and were affected by what happened with George Floyd, that was real important. But it was and is real important. And I love the way that we as a city responded to it as the right thing to do. To be able to challenge the ways that that the issue's been handled for the longest time. I keep thinking about the movie Detroit and seeing the ending of it, and it happened the way that we expected it to happen. That there was no consequences for the police that ended up doing the dirt, even when everybody else lined up to try to support the police in that situation. But they did what was just, and I think Keith Ellison helped to create what was just in this situation. But we also know that there's criminal behavior that happens in terms of domestic violence. We haven't talked about that. And that deals with, so we had to deal with the challenges from the without, but we also have to deal with the challenges from within. And we have to be able to talk about those things to be able to support victims of abuse, whether they're children, whether they're women, and whether they're men. And we need to keep those conversations happening, but also try to figure out how do we respond to it as a community, as well as challenge the police. I'm a Black man in the United States. I know what it's like. I've dealt with the tragedies and the injustice of that behavior growing up. My brother did, who's older than me. But it's not going to stop me from talking about the other challenges that we have within the community. And it seems like we do one thing or the other. And we have to do better than that if we're going to find a way to respond to it in an effective way. I also, so after the World Trade Center situation. I had been there and stayed at the World Trade Center a few years before. And then when I got back to New York, I had a project where I was doing some consulting, and it was down the street from where the catastrophe happened. And then I staying in another hotel when they were starting to build the memorial. And it was interesting to see the impact on how people were affected by it within the city, but also what people were doing in terms of dealing with the development of the memorial center and the efforts associated with that. And people in the city were, quite affected by it, as they would be, and I think that as a person that wasn't living in New York, but was, certainly affected by what I saw and what it did to bring up perhaps some secondary trauma for me. The other thing that I thought about was how people may be reacting and feeling within the city, and how they were trying to make sense of it and try to come to grips with it as well. And I remember that there were efforts to try to censor mosques in the city of New York, where people were trying to deal with their own reactions and feelings and such, but they were making everything pejorative about every person who was a Muslim in the city, and which was unfair. That people were trying to do things and to make themselves healthy, and they weren't people who were evil opponents with other people who were within the city. They were trying to do well within their communities and not against the United States. And I think it is those things where it's important to find a way to have a discussion and to be open in the discussion, to try to hear what people have to say associated with those challenges and those problems. And I think we've got to find ways to be open about that and how we're affected and what we can do, what actions we can do to try to reduce the problems, and to heal one another. I think that's the thing. That can be a goal.
Thank you, brother.
Dr. B, critique this observation before you go. And I just remember this feeling that I think I had, but I think maybe a lot of Black people had, when crises like this occur, and they don't occur because we were central to them. We were not the perceived source or offender. Somehow, even though the event is horrific, there's a sigh and a sense of relief that we didn't do it. We didn't cause it. It's number one. But we also have this question about check this out. Now they're going to be mad at them, not at us. And now these people who have, from our point of view, too often sided with our oppressors are now being cast as adversaries and enemies, the way we have been cast as adversaries and enemies for no reason other than the fact that we have been the victims of supremacist oppression, imperial, colonial policy, slavery. And so there's a part of us that, even if we don't say it, I feel we intuit it. When something happens and all of a sudden our Asian brothers and sisters, who we feel too often are dismissive towards us, right? And who readily join white people, the ruling class, so the management class, the controlling class, in condemning our humanity. And then when white people or situations create criticism of them by white people, then the tables have turned a little bit. And so that's something that I say I observe, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just me, but Dr. B, I'm going to pass the talking stick to you. Because am I seeing something or saying something that other people see and say as well?
Yes, you are. And it's almost like that elephant in the room among multicultural communities, that the whiter and lighter you are, the less you get the blame. And we know when we think about systems theory that any system that has pressure looks for and identifies by its own nature a scapegoat. And Black folks, we have been the whipping boy, whipping girl, scapegoat of this country for 400 years. And the difference between us and others is that they see us, this melting pot we've never melted. So when they see us, they know just who to put all of those negative notions on. And then it just reminds me of growing up when my brother Douglas, he used to get in trouble all the time. And my parents, you know, they're old school. You'll get a whooping. And for those who are in CPS, it's a difference between a beating, beat down, whooping, and a spanking. So I just want to let them know it's different character. So he would get whoopings all the time because he just never did what our parents said. But if my sister Lisa and I got in trouble, he'd be over in the corner just so relieved and laughing. Like, finally, it's not me. And so that's human. It's really human nature to be happy to have the relief of not having that pressure of being the scapegoat. And this is on a socio-cultural level. So it's insidious, it's repetitive, it happens almost every day. So I think that, yeah, you're right about that. And when we do speak to the fact that these problems have affected us, we don't have like now, because of coronavirus being called the China virus or whatever the negative connotation is. Anybody of Asian descent who looks like they're just Asian descent, they get it now, and they get all these hate crimes because they are Asian descent. And so it's so important to this last legislative session. You know, they did a law about not scapegoating Asian people. And I was going to go, so where's the law about not scapegoating Black folks? Where's that law? And of course they gave them money and some reparations, and it's just what it is an unfair process. But what I want to see is, as we get more power, we need to know how to use it and not be afraid that people are going to say, oh, he's going to take care of his own people. Well, everybody who gets in power takes care of their own people, except us. So with that, I'm going to shut up. Anybody else who wants to talk and stick to Nanye, you haven't said anything. You want to say something before we go, or Mr. Yele, one of y'all? Because otherwise I'm handing it to Brother Al. We got 1 minute.
Oh, is the time gone already?
Yes.
Oh, boy.
I think everything was well said, everything that I wanted to touch on. And just one of the things that I learned is, you know, we're resilient and we're never going to give up. And it's just like you said, Dr. B, once we learn as a Black culture to come together, we can start tackling the rest of this, the situation. So, I hope that people see the resiliency of the human soul, of our American spirit as Black people, and the power of good and stepping up in bad times together.
Thank you.
Well said. I think we'll close it with that. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Remind you, like the program, share it, and let people know. Join us every week. Chip in with questions and comments. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Powerful.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had this now, people won't wait. Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. Had enough of all the rules you were breaking. Had enough of all the money you were making. Had enough, no more life gets taken. Had enough, this is the proclamation. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. You better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. Had enough of all the rules you're breaking. Had enough, all the money you're making. Had enough, no more life gets taken. Had enough, this is the proclamation. We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We've had enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We've had enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We've had enough. So many gone. How can we fill the void? How can we fill? We've had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard. We've had enough. Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand. We've had enough. Sean Bell, what the hell? We've had enough. Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said? We've had enough. This is a proclamation.